from London, and a big hello to you wherever you are joining us from around the world today. It's really great to have you here for our webinar on building a digital profession. I'm Siobhan Benita. I'm a former UK senior civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of the publishing house Global Government Forum, which serves civil servants around the world. And I'd also like to thank our knowledge partner today, Coursera. Now, governments around the world have been on a digital transformation journey for many years now, but the pandemic has really escalated that work, creating huge demand for digital skills within civil services as departments have adapted to meeting the urgent need to deliver services online and in new ways. Those countries with a government-wide digital data and technology profession have often found it easier to meet those demands, redeploying specialist staff, supporting departments to build digital skills, and tapping into networks of digital leaders. And as we all slowly emerge from the pandemic, the benefits of having an effective digital profession will remain, bringing efficiencies, reducing errors, meeting citizens' expectations, better management of data to inform good policy. But there are challenges in terms of recruitment, skills, historic silos and ways of working. And we'll get a chance to discuss all of these and more with our expert panel today. Now, in a moment, I'm going to introduce each of our panel members and they'll give some opening remarks. But actually, this is a great opportunity to have your questions answered. So you should see at the bottom of whichever device you're using, there's a Q&A function. At any time while you're listening to the speakers or just after they've spoken, please message in your questions and we'll get through as many of those as we can before the end of the webinar. So now to our fantastic panel. Unfortunately, Dr. Vic Pant is actually unable to join us today due to some last-minute technical issues, but we still have a stellar panel for you today. So first, we'll hear from Danielle Brigida, who is Deputy Director of Digital Strategy at the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management in America. She has led extremely successful initiatives on social media and strategic communications and the adoption of new technologies and approaches in a range of public sector organizations. Then we'll hear from Stephen Somerville, who is the Global Government Partnerships Advisor at our knowledge partner, Coursera. Stephen works with governments and public sector organizations across Europe and Africa to create learning programs that help civil servants develop the digital expertise and skills they need to meet the demands of fast-changing policy areas, sectors, and citizen expectations. Then we'll head over to Canada to hear from Teresa D'Andrea, who is Director General of Data and Advanced Analytics at the Digital Services and Transformation Office for Transport Canada. Teresa leads several of the federal government's signature initiatives aimed at transforming the government of Canada to a digital-first, user-centered, data-driven organization. And last, but definitely not least, we'll hear from Jeff Huggins, who is Director of Digital at the Scottish Government Digital Directorate here in the United Kingdom. Jeff has worked across a range of government, national health, and wider public sector organizations, leading work on digital transformations and key policy areas such as mental health to improve outcomes for the public. So as I said, we've got a brilliant panel with us here today. Please do make the most of them and message in your questions. And then without further ado, I'm going to invite Danielle to give us the first presentation. Over to you, Danielle.
Great, thank you so much. Thanks so much for having me. So I'm Danielle Brigida, and right now I'm currently working for the Bureau of the Ocean Energy Management, which is actually a department within Interior, and I'll go into that. But what led me to my digital profession, or what kind of brought me here onto this panel, was really developing and focusing on digital engagement with different people, different audiences. And so I'm excited to talk about that. We can go to the next slide and I'll just give a brief overview. So for those who don't know, the Department of the Interior is actually in charge of managing the natural and cultural resources for the United States. And we have a number of different bureaus, some of which you may have heard of, like the National Park Service or the Fish and Wildlife Service within the US. But we also have a lot of science organizations as well as cultural management that we do. And the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, is one that manages offshore resources. So we do a ton with the public. And one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about, before I had this role at BOEM, I was actually the Deputy Director of Digital Strategy at overall Interior. And it was something that I really focused a ton on, which was thinking about the digital solutions for our entire agency, knowing that we have such a wide mission and we have coverage over so many different people. And so really, I grew up in the digital kind of time frame. I started my career at National Wildlife Federation. I spent about 8 years starting social media over there, and moved over into government because I really wanted to be close to the work and help talk about it. And I don't know if you guys find this, but when I'm really close to an issue, sometimes I get more technical and I get more, it gets harder to explain it. And so I try and always keep that lens of, really we're trying to get down to business with digital solutions. We're trying to solve problems. And that's kind of been the approach. And so at Interior, knowing that, the Office of the Secretary has to also help all these individual bureaus, I was constantly trying to think of, how can we actually provide solutions for them? And I come at digital from a very communications heavy standpoint. So I'm looking at, engagement. How do we better serve the public? How do we communicate our issues so that they feel included and so that we build trust with them? But it's been tough. And with the pandemic, we're seeing a ton of trust issues. The US government's undergone a lot of changes. And so really kind of looking across, as a career civil servant, we transcend politics, we transcend all these different issues that seem very heavy and top of mind. But we're also trying to look so far to the future. And that can be really challenging with digital because of just how challenging it is to forecast. So you can go to the next slide. So the big thing for me was, especially my role at Interior and then actually moving to BOEM, my profession, I started kind of at the level of the secretary, really kind of focusing on all the individual bureaus and how can I provide technological assistance. And so really kind of paying attention to what made sense for us. And one of the things that really helped us was we got an enterprise-wide social media management tool. We were looking at different ways to actually empower our on-the-ground communicators in a way that was different than what we'd done before. But the digital landscape moves so quickly. And when I was initially talking about this and just, how things shape and move and how we adjust, government has we have an uphill climb because we have so many other considerations. So if you want to go to the next slide. So one of the things that I'm always trying to do, and my job now at BOEM is really focusing on renewable energy and how do I communicate about that. But when I was at Interior, it was really kind of fixating on these things. What is the longevity of the tool? Will it last several years at least? How scalable is it? How accessible is it? How secure is it? These are all the things that kind of I would have to go through checkpoint wise. And it is really challenging because you can't always forecast. And I know when we were discussing this, and I'm excited for this panel because I'm going to learn so much. One of the things that I'm constantly thinking about is how do we better serve the public, not just in the immediate, but in the future, and how do we meet the expectations that the public already has, which I think is actually the more challenging thing. You've got the businesses, they're meeting expectations, they're using all sorts of forms of communication, and we've got to kind of catch up, but still meet kind of a more strict, I think, criteria when it comes to privacy and security and things like that. So that's not to say we can't be adventurous and explore, but it really does come down to we have to think so much more toward the future. It's not about profit today, it's about thinking about tomorrow as well, which I think presents a really amazing challenge. That first picture of me was outside, and that's my happy place. I work largely around wildlife and conservation issues or for wildlife and conservation issues. And so it's been really kind of interesting to blend those two loves in my work and pay attention to, how do we connect people to the outdoors, connect people to these resources using these tools. And I think that, we're in this really exciting time, despite trust being very low in the government. we have the technology now to do it better. We can create these virtual interpretation platforms. We can do so much. So it's very exciting. I don't mean to, like, it's overwhelming to be involved in digital right now, I think. But it's very exciting. It's exciting in terms of what we can accomplish. So you can go to the next slide. And one of the things that I've struggled, and I just kind of put this out to the panel, is the other way government really needs to catch up is digital needs to be a strategic partner. And however that looks in your, wherever you are in the world, like figuring out how can digital not just sit, underneath public affairs or deep down in there, but really be an equal partner. That is something that I just see, if we're going to stay relevant, we need to really focus on this and prioritize how people are communicating digitally. And that's not to say, I've always explained social media and digital communications as a new way to do old business. And the way I mean that is, you still want to connect in person. You still want to have those face-to-face interactions, but we are able to kind of manage and create a lot more now. So figuring out, however that looks, whether you're looking at analytics or you're figuring out how do you make digital a strategic partner in your organization, or how can you do more of that, I think is going to be the way of the future. But that's all.
Thank you so much, Danielle. I have to say, we've done several webinars on the topic of digital. It's really great to hear somebody speak from a particular policy area and also a particular aspect of that. And it's unusual, I think, to hear about digital and communications spoken about in that way. So it's really great to get your personal experience on that. I think as an opening presentation, it's been so useful because you set out, I think, some of those key challenges for civil servants, our audience today, in terms of how do you use digital to build trust, build engagement with the public? How do you make sure that the platforms that you use, the things you develop, are secure, they're sustainable, they're affordable? I think all of those things are real challenges for public servants. And then I loved what you summarized at the end there about digital shouldn't be a kind of new silo or an add-on. It has to be a proper strategic partner, whichever part of government you sit in. So thank you so much. That's really set the scene well in terms of our opening presentation. I'm now going to invite Stephen to give his opening remarks.
Great, thank you. And thanks very much for inviting me to speak. It's great to hear firsthand about the role of digital and the requirement for the kind of strategic fit of that within government. Next slide, please. I'm going to just ask you to advance the slides here and there. So thank you for that. I want to begin by taking a step back. I think everyone knows this, but it's good to acknowledge this. There's a global shortage of tech workers. Korn Ferry places this at 85 million by 2030. So when we're talking about building a digital profession in government, we've got to think about that context. And if you could move the next slide forward. And to make things harder, private sector salaries outpace government salaries typically by about 20%. So you're competing for those people, but you're competing at a disadvantage. And the key point here for me is about reskilling. You're not going to fill the open roles in most governments on the open market. You're going to need to think about reskilling the employees you've already got into these high demand areas. Next slide, please. Second point I want to make is about the shelf life of technical skills. Some studies place it at less than 3 years, 2.5 years for some of the bleeding edge technical skills, because as Danielle said, everything is changing so quickly, new platforms are emerging, the skills we need keep changing. So think of it this way, if your competency framework was put together pre-2018, there's a good chance it's out of date. So this implies that you need to create an upskilling system that's flexible and adaptable, and you need to understand what skills you've got and what skills you need to develop. Next slide, please. Third point is about silos. We've already had this mentioned once already. We hear a lot about the data family of jobs or the digital family of jobs in our work with governments. But the point is this, there aren't really any analog jobs now. There is a need for digital literacy. There's a need for data literacy across governments, across organizations. And we see a lot of programs that are built around specific competencies within digital domains. What worries us is the gap that leaves in the rest of the organization. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about Coursera and our approach to this. We're an online learning platform, but think of us as an ecosystem that connects these different stakeholders. So 160 of the best universities and business schools from 43 countries, 60 industry partners like Google, IBM, Salesforce, Cloudera. And we connect those educators with more than 80 million learners from all over the world, some of whom are from these institutions you see in the bottom right. So that's thousands of businesses all over the world, thousands of universities, and hundreds of government agencies, state-owned entities, public sector organizations that are working with us to build specific skills within their cohorts. So every day we're learning more and more about how the world's learning, what skills are prioritized, and what skills those different segments are operating at. And just to give you a sense of the government work down in that bottom right corner, sometimes this can range from upskilling an entire civil service, so that could be 60,000 civil servants across digital and leadership and all sorts of different competencies. Or in other cases, it might be a very specific thing working within a data science team within a public sector organization or something like that. So we do this a lot, and not just in the public sector, but also in the private sector. And if we could skip on to the next slide, that'd be great. And so we've moved towards a skills first model. So moving away from relying on things like course completions or learning hours as metrics, but leveraging our platform's ability to measure skills. So what you see here is the skill set of a data scientist, and this is built from the data that we have across 87 million learners, or at least the data scientists amongst that group. And so these are the competency levels you see on the right, or top right, of a good data scientist. And as the learner learns, any course that they learn that contains the opportunity to assess their level of skill or to build that competency will help refine that score. So if you could just click just to give you a sense of what that looks like. Oh, sorry, I shouldn't have gone for these ambitious builds. There we go. So yeah, you can see that the learner can see their competency grow, right? So this is good for them. This is a useful thing for them. And of course, you stand back from that as an organization, you see that across the entire organization. You get to see what skills and competencies are present, and you can set yourself targets about growing them. And if you just press again, and then what we're able to do is connect learning that builds those competencies that map to those roles. Right, so that's how our skill sets kind of work. So automated learning programs that acknowledge the level the learner's at, helps them build the competencies that the organization wants them to build for specific roles. On the next slide, we can see how that kind of groups together. Yeah, just skip these bits. Thanks very much. Into academies. So here we're looking at the Data and Analytics Academy. We have other academies, Leadership Academy, Finance Academy. But in this, they all kind of operate in the same way. You'll see these skill sets as examples on this page, very similar to the one that we just saw previously. But this ties back to the point I was making at the beginning, right? So we group these into different sections, right? Across the top, the fundamentals that should be across that entire organization. So things that you'd want to permeate across government, AI basics for everyone, data analysis for everyone, for example. And then in the middle, kind of specific groups related to specific teams, so data science or data engineering in this case. And at the bottom, the reskilling, right? Taking existing employees that you can see have an aptitude, they already know the organization, and reskilling them into business analysts and data engineers and so on. And so, yeah, that's kind of the points I wanted to make, right? So number one, recognizing that reskilling is a vital component in this area. Understanding that this is a super dynamic area and creating systems that deal with that. And also understanding that this affects the whole organization, not just the digital teams. And that's what I wanted to say, so thank you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. I think that builds on really nicely from what Danielle said. So Danielle is the kind of policy maker, and then you coming in as the person that can help maybe civil servants if they're looking at, well, how do we build this profession? What does that mean for our people? As you say, real parallels there between what you said and what Danielle said in terms of pace and how quickly things are changing, and the need for organizations to constantly adapt and update their kind of competency frameworks. But also, I think it's going to be a theme that we might hear from other people as well, this sense that alongside specialists who have this deep technical knowledge, you kind of need everybody to have a basic understanding of what digital means and what it can do in terms of improving outcomes for people. Thank you so much, Stephen. Lots of food for thought there, and I'm sure lots of people come back with questions. We're already getting a couple of questions in, so please do keep those coming in. Now I'm going to invite Teresa to give us her presentation.
Hi, thank you. So unfortunately, I don't have slides, but I will. I'll just riff sort of off the top of my head. So when we start talking about, digital, and I've been kind of grappling with this for a good portion of my career. I'm really at all right now. I'm watching, as we're speaking, everything's being sort of automatically captioned. And when I joined the public service and started working, we still had admins taking shorthand for executives as they were speaking. So, I mean, that's a good 25 years ago, but like, it's amazing how quickly things have adjusted. So I think the term digital really makes people uncomfortable, especially our business partners. So I come from, I'm with Transport Canada, and I'm in charge of data and advanced analytics and also the services file. So I'm sort of a bridge between the IT world and the business world. And I do see that, as soon as you start talking about digital, people get very, get uncomfortable. They don't understand it. They don't know it. And I really like, Danielle, you were saying that, digital is a new way of doing old business. I think that's something that, that really rings true, and people need to understand it. I think we've seen too many movies of dystopian worlds where robots become our overlords, or we worry about robots and automation taking over our jobs, leaving us, unemployed and penniless on the side of the road. And it's scary and it's stressful. But the reality is that the more digital we become, the more freedom we actually have to do the real work that we've been hired to do. So it's not, I don't know about you guys, but I spend a good portion of my day doing, and even at my level, doing a lot of administrative tasks, and not necessarily the cool, gnarly problems, attacking them, which I really would have liked to be doing. And it's really not about machines or algorithms replacing humans. It's about collaborating with them and seeing machines as sort of as part of your workforce. So when we talk about robots, we're really talking, or machines, we're talking about, robotic process automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning. These are all excellent at processing petabytes and petabytes of data in milliseconds. Whereas humans are creative creatures with an ability to adapt and work with uncertainty. So machines are here to augment humans who can provide that higher order cognitive value to your organization. So, as I was saying, like, how many of you were hired to do, exciting policy work or conduct inspections? And, how many of you spend a good percentage of your day on repeatable administrative tasks, searching for that email that you need to reply to so that you move things forward. So at Transport Canada, we are a regulatory body, and we conduct inspections. So for things like rail and aviation, we actually have inspectors go out and, check the lines and check, check airports and planes and whatnot. So you start looking at, could we use AI to determine which sites our inspectors should travel to next? So this airline, for example, is always compliant, so we're good. We don't need to check in on them as often as we do on this airline, because they're, they've had problems in the past. And what if we could leverage case management systems powered by cognitive computing to manage scheduling and follow-ups, or having a digital assistant tell the inspector where to go and debrief them on their drive over to the location. So voice-based smart assistants can document your notes on a file while you're driving from one inspection site to another, or predictive analytics can flag where there might be problem areas in the future where we want to maybe take a little bit of a deeper look. So machines alone can't do, can do only so much. And same goes for humans, but together they're greater than the sum of the parts. So humans are better at creativity, collaborating, knowledge sharing, problem solving, leadership, empathy, communications, any kind of jobs that require that social intelligence and sophisticated cognitive tasks, right? Whereas systems are great at implementing routine, repeatable tasks. So AI-assisted decision-making, for example, or visualizations, or voice recognition, virtual reality. So we need to start moving from being task managers as employees to that of being problem solvers. So building a digital profession really means embracing technology and working with it to really deliver value to the organization. So I'm not, Stephen was talking about upskilling, and I can't, I can't stress the importance of that. So, for you, don't wait around for learning opportunities to be presented to you. Take the bull by the horns and seek out those opportunities for yourself. So there's learning through online, on-demand courses, boot camps. There's so many ways that we can learn rather than your traditional going and sitting in a classroom. Right? Change is coming, and understanding the skills that you're going to need in order to succeed and find creative ways to learn is really going to be important. So automation is powered by data, and data is huge right now. So, I'm working in that field myself. Organizations are scrambling to get a handle on governance, stewardship, management, setting standards and policy for data, like ethical use of AI, for example. And just to sort of add on a little bit to what Stephen was saying, McKinsey claims that 400 million jobs are going to be displaced by automation, but 500 to 900 million new jobs are going to be created. So we're going to start looking at remote teams, career mobility, work management, or workload management. So less hierarchy and more accountability is going to be pushed down to the working level. And problem identification and problem solving will be happening more at the source. And then senior executives really become conductors of the orchestra and work on the prioritization. So I'm just going to sort of leave you with this. It's not all doom and gloom. It is not all, the robots are coming to take over our jobs. It really is about us working together with machines and figuring out a way that we can really bring the best of both worlds to bear.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Teresa. Nice to have that optimistic vision to end with there. I think there are a lot of misconceptions, preconceptions about what automation and some of those digital new technologies are going to mean for workforces and for people. And I really like the way you summarize it there. And it's about enhancing and augmenting humans, not replacing them, and actually freeing up that resource to focus on those more creative and complex actions that the machines aren't going to be able to do so well. And then you touched on, I think, data at the end there. We're getting questions in already. I think data will be something that people will want to ask about, in particular data and trust issues, I think, sure, in this conversation.
Thank you,
Teresa. I'm going to invite Jeff. I know Jeff's having a few technical issues there, so don't worry, Jeff. If you glitch on and off, I'm sure we will make it work. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Siobhan. I guess I'd probably like to begin by disagreeing in that I think I am looking forward to the time when the robots come and take my job. I'm sort of hoping it would be sooner rather than later. In that, after so many years, you become a bit tired and you think that the burden could be picked up by a helpful robot who would probably do it at least as well as I do it. So that's the future that we're all looking towards. I'm going to give a few reflections just on where we are currently in Scotland and the things that are at the front of my mind in terms of the digital profession. And if I go back slightly more than 30 years, when I went first into Old Admiralty Building on Whitehall and took my first job, we had a typing pool where we took bits of paper and people typed it. And then a few years later in Belfast, in Stormont House Annex, we put in a computer system, and then we actually gave people computers on their desks, and we had an IT department. And the IT department, the people who came and did the work for you. But now I'm looking across my organisation where traditionally the profession would have been in my directorate. I would have owned the skills and the profession, and that's no longer adequate. I need to see digital professionals, digital leaders in education portfolio, in health portfolio, right across the organisation, because the skills are now part of how we deliver government. Government is now digital. This idea of you could almost just say government. The digital word is now redundant within this, and this is how we do business. So that transition means that we need to both be able to create that capability across the organization, but retain the idea of a profession. And I think that's a key function for government. So that's the first thinking, and this now needs to spread. And it's not just about skills and awareness and knowledge. It's about there being real digital leaders right across the organization. And this panel's been great because that's what I'm seeing. I'm seeing digital leaders in right across the organization, not balkanized in the basement with the server farm. That's always good to see. That gives us the challenge also, how do we attract and retain people? And we did some research over the last couple of years when I was out with the NHS, and we asked people why they joined us in that, and we did that partly so that when we wrote advertisements to get future people to join us, we knew why people had joined us in the past. And what people told us was they wanted to do something which had meaning and which was interesting. So the people who joined us, and they're a subset of all the people who could have joined us. So clearly there were people who didn't want to do things that were meaningful or interesting. And the good thing is they didn't join us because that wouldn't work for us anyway. But people saw that as being the reason why they came to join us. And indeed, one of the things that came out of that was people would take a pay cut to come and work in government because we do the most exciting things. We do things that you do not get the chance to do in any other industry. And so that's taking us to a point where when we advertise, we no longer say, this is a band B job, which pays this much, and we do a good pension. We tell the story that if you come here, you will build Scotland's new social security system. You will be delivering, improved healthcare through better reducing cancer waiting times. You will save lives, and that's what connects to people. People get excited by that. But the other side to that is we recruit, and we can recruit, and we certainly did recruit in the NHS, very bright people. These people don't join for 30 years. These people join and do this particular piece of work or this one and the next one, and they might stay for 2 or 3 years, and then they'll jump and do something interesting somewhere else. Because of the skills that they have and the way the industry works, they can move from organization to organization. So that means our mindset around recruitment has to anticipate challenges around retention, which are good because it allows us to refresh, but it means that we need to be in continuous recruitment to be able to fill those professional skills across the organization and see that as a healthy thing and not as a negative. So, whereas a poor old chap like myself, were I to go out on the employment market, it's probably years, and ideally the robots will get there first before I would find something. My engineers would walk out of my door and into another job straight away. They have that capability, and that's an asset. That's a good thing. So third and final thing I wanted to reflect on is the other reason why people want to join and work with us is people like to work with people they like to work with. And so culture is core to what we do in developing the profession. Digital skills work in combination. People work as part of teams. They bring different skills, and that is only effective. And those teams are only effective when the culture is correct. So a key function for digital leaders like myself is to tend to the culture, to pay attention to what's going on, and to ensure that the values and behaviours that we want to see are the ones that we actually see in practice. So in that area, certainly with the NHS, we would actually have a culture interview where we assessed aspects of this. Very, very keen to see diversity. So it's not a monoculture, but within that diversity, we expect to see particular types of behaviour. So curiosity, respect, engagement, and things like that. So those three things, the proliferation of the profession across the organisation, the purpose that people are able to bring, but also that idea of continuing working on the culture are the key things on my mind at the moment.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Again, another really great perspective to add to what we've heard from our panel members already. Really like the way you phrased it there, that essentially government is digital now, everything is digital. So almost the adjective is redundant really, and that we have to think about digital as an integral part of everything that civil servants do. It's not a kind of standalone, separate or a siloed new profession. very interested what you say then about those recruitment and retention challenges. So why would you, as a digital professional, come and work somewhere where you probably won't get paid as much as if you were in the private sector? And a lot of the stuff there resonated with me about the culture in the civil service and the outcomes, making a difference to people's lives, so some of that real motivation to people. I want to use that actually, say thank you to all your opening presentations. We've got lots of questions coming in already. I'm going to kick off, before I go to questions from the audience, with one of my own, but kind of building on what Jeff said there, but you all kind of mentioned this in your presentations as well. So I mean, you said there, Jeff, that those motivational issues, those issues around kind of the quality of the work are enough to recruit great people into the civil service and the public sector. I'm interested in everybody's thoughts on, to what extent is that true? Are we getting sufficient numbers of good people into the civil service? And how can we keep them there? You mentioned there the issue of people moving around a lot. I think that's something in the private sector. People will go from organisation to organisation. Does the civil service, whatever country you're in, do civil services have to accept that and think that people are going to be more dynamic, that they might spend time outside, then come back into the civil service? Do we need a new way of thinking about the workforce? I'm going to come back to Danielle again to ask her thoughts as somebody who actually probably came in, unlike Jeff and myself, where you had typing pools and things like that. You came in when digital was kind of there and a big part of what everybody did. What do you think about those workforce issues?
I mean, I definitely agree that, you know, well, I think what comes down to it with digital workforces are, especially in government, the pressure is kind of delayed. Like, we're getting it now, and and certainly, like, I find that it's a few years behind where I was even in a nonprofit. That being said, it's also because, like, at least, you know, where I can only speak from the Department of the Interior, but we're still kind of in this like strange place where measurement and reporting on measurement and kind of tracking things it's not built into like how we make decisions, which is kind of fascinating. And so they haven't prioritized digital, I think largely because they're not looking at the numbers. So the workforces themselves are just now adapting, like, and just now changing, and they're starting to kind of invest in, you know, a certain skill set. And so I'm basically agreeing with everything here. I mean, I think from what I'm seeing, we are changing. We're just slower and a little delayed. And maybe that's good because it allows things to like work out. It allows us to work out the kinks with some of the where digital is positioned and all that. But I would just say that, you know, from the workforce standpoint, at least with an Interior, we're starting to see different bureaus invest in digital in a way. But you're right, like, yeah, I mean, there's resistance. You're getting met with some resistance from staff, but mostly it's just, you know, there's not always a direct path forward, and it's largely because we're not looking at the numbers. You know, we're not making this decision together, I guess.
Yeah, that's an issue around how much it's joined up across organizations, I think, as well. Thanks, Janet. Teresa, what are your thoughts on this kind of the challenges around recruitment and retention of the skills that you need into an organization?
Yeah, so I mean, it is a challenge, and you know, we especially when we start talking about data science, and you know, there are only so many courses that, you know, in universities, and the data science, like the kids that are coming out of there are already spoken for, you know, first year. I think it's really hard. Like, I almost don't, you know, competing with the private sector, I almost feel like you can't compete, right? They're two completely different worlds. Like, you're comparing apples and oranges, and people who work in the public sector, really, at the end of the day, we're not in it for the money. I think everyone can pretty much attest to that, right? So if coming out of school, or even, you know, people who are looking at moving into getting, you know, big money, they don't come to government. People who come to government, they're the ones who want to change the world, right? So I think it's really about how you characterize. You know, if you're after the big money, go private sector, 100%. That's not why you're here. But if you are here about, not wanting to line some CEO's pocket, and you're genuinely here to change the world, to make it better for, when I look at transportation, everything I wear, everything I eat, everything that's in my home has been transported from somewhere else, right? So how can I help the world? Like when we look at in North America, and Danielle will understand this, we've had a lot of shortages over the past year and a half, because of directly as a result of shipping containers not being available to bring products over, right? Like it's everything you do in government. It doesn't matter whether you're, on the policy side, or you're cutting checks for social insurance. Like it doesn't really matter. Everything that you do benefits your mom, your dad, your neighbors, your fellow citizens, and globally as well. And I think and at least, I'm starting to see a lot of young people are kind of getting away from that. I want the big money and I want the lavish lifestyle. It's more about, what does my life mean at the end? When I look back, did I make a difference? Did I help improve things? And so I think that's the sort of the hook that we have as civil servants, to bring in that top talent and to really recruit amazing people. It's really about sort of that social sort of contract that you sign, that is so incredibly important for all of us, for humanity.
Thanks, Teresa. Any UK civil servants that are in the audience, your point about transportation and supply issues will be very, very relevant at the moment, because we're suffering from that quite seriously at the moment here in the UK. Stephen, I want to come to you. Your thoughts on this, the issue of kind of recruitment and private sector versus public sector. Is it as black and white as that? Or do you think it's about maybe deepening partnerships between the two sectors? And also you mentioned, you can't fill all the gaps. You have to, by bringing in people from outside, you've got to upskill as well. So your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so just to deal with the second part first, the advantage of upskilling people that are already there is they have that domain expertise, and they may be, as the other panelists have said, they may have already kind of chosen that path. We work with a lot of governments, and I'm dealing with them in sub-Saharan Africa, I'm dealing with them in Eastern Europe. And in some of those conversations, I'm often struck by people, just to come back to Jeff's point, who have come from a Big Four consultancy background and have chosen to serve their country. I think that connecting with that and kind of building on that is absolutely critical. I'm sorry, I've forgotten the first part of the question. Could you just repeat that again?
Is it always a question of either or could it be about developing partnerships between public and private sector, so that we're recognizing actually work with the private sector as well?
Well, I mean, it's always going to be a blend of the two, isn't it? So if you take both ends of the spectrum, if you outsourced absolutely everything that a government had to, that's lunacy. It's going to cost a lot of money. It's going to, build in a lot of risk. If you go to this end of the spectrum, where every line of code on every single application is written by a government employee, then that's unworkable. It's going to take too long. So it's always going to be somewhere in the middle. And I don't think it's Coursera's place to have a position on exactly where that should be. But it's kind of like wherever you end up, you need to have people who understand the digital landscape, and you're going to need a degree of expertise within the organization to not just make the decisions on how e-government gets built, but how legislation gets passed in this sector as well. So, whichever way it comes, those skills need building.
Great, thanks. I want to get to the questions from the audience as well, but Jeff, I'm going to come to you for your thoughts on this, and then Teresa, I know you wanted to come in on one particular point. So Jeff, over to you. Jeff might be having a problem. Teresa, you wanted to pick up on the public-private sector point, and then I'll go back to Jeff.
Yeah, okay, so I just wanted...
Can you hear me, or just glitch? I've just Jen.
Yeah.
Jeff, are you back?
Have I disappeared? I think so. Am I back?
Sorry, okay. Jeff, I'm just going to let Teresa pick up on one point on public-private relationship, then I'll come back to you.
Yeah, so the only thing I wanted to say, I don't think it's an either or. I think it's something that you can work together. And Estonia is one country who's done a fantastic job at having that public and private relationship. And I do recall being there, meeting with their chief statistician, and he was talking about, you know, what they're working on and giving us a debrief. And he actually brought in some developers from the private sector to help to sort of augment the conversation about how they were helping support. So I think it can be done, and I think there are models that exist out there.
Thanks, Tracy. Yeah, Estonia are superb on all things digital. Yeah. Jeff, over to you.
Yeah, so I guess a couple of other things which I think are important as part of the process of trying to bring in talent from the private sector. One of the first things that we did was we appointed a person who was a specialist recruiter who we took from Skyscanner, which is a travel business which is located in Scotland. So we actually went out and found somebody who did this as their day job, and we got him to do that work for us. And we built it as a particular capacity within the organization, you know, something that we had the skills and knowledge to do. Yeah. So that's something that we're looking to do. I think the other thing which I see in government is quite often we're competing with other parts of government for the same talent. Yeah. So at the moment we're doing work in a Scottish context to address that, to try and create a single pipeline rather than multiple pipelines. The other thing to recognize, I think, is the economics of when you don't recruit. So if I don't recruit and have to go to the contract market or the interim market, I'm paying probably somewhere between 150% and 200% of the cost of doing it. And longer term, the more I do that, the more difficult it becomes for me to recruit permanent members of staff. So there's a slippery slope here if you're not effective in that recruitment sort of space.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I'm going to go to some of the audience questions now, and we've got two that are similar, so I'm going to take them together. They've come from Dwight King and from John Luty. So Dwight says, how do you address the dilemma of staff members who are resistant or slow or even outright refuse to adapt to the digital paradigm? And yet they have skills and knowledge that's very valuable to the organization. And John similarly says, unfortunately, setbacks and cynicism has been created within the employee ranks from historic disasters, such as the Phoenix payroll system in Canada. Sorry, Teresa, I don't know anything about that, and I don't want to pick on Canada in particular, but that's I'm sure all countries have projects that they could mention as well. So those two issues together, kind of how do you overcome staff resistance to this new digital world? Teresa, I'm going to kick off with you as Canada was mentioned there.
Yeah, no, Phoenix was our pay system, and it was an absolute disaster that affected, 350,000 employees across the country and their pay. So it was, so yeah, we do have, I think as we move into into this digital space, look, there's always a bell curve, right? So I don't worry about the people who are digging their heels in. You're not going to change their mind today, maybe even not tomorrow. Focus on the people who are engaged. Focus on those pockets of people who do want change and who do want to, and then start building use cases. Start having just, and I find that when it's like an overall transformation, like we're going to transform everything and everyone into this digital ecosystem, I don't really find that typically is all that successful. What I do see as successful is you take one use case, right? Whether it's like my example of trains, of the railway inspectors or whatnot, and just say, okay, let's take a look at what you guys are doing. What's the process, from beginning to end? Where are you starting? What are you ending? What are the steps in between? Is this the best process? Where does your data come from? What does your user actually need? Let's follow them around in a day. Let's see where we can automate pieces of that. Let's see if there are other data sources that we can pull in to help, help augment, right? And I think if you start looking at it from that perspective, and then you walk through and then you hand off and you say, okay, here you go. You have one use case, one new process, and you've completely made it digital, right? And don't even tell them that they've made it digital. Just do it. right? And then what will happen is once you have a few of those under your belt, people will start to look, the naysayers will start to look over and say, ah, that's kind of cool. Look at how easy it is for them. And look at how efficient they've become. Look at how quickly, and look, their employees are actually doing cool stuff instead of all the administrative tasks. That's where you start getting that pivot and that change. But it's as they say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. I think that's typically the best approach.
Thanks, Teresa. Jeff, is that something that you would echo, the kind of do it by doing it rather than say you're going to do it approach?
Yeah, I think that is the case. There's some areas I think where there's probably exceptions to that. So if we think about the focus on cybersecurity and the requirement that staff have got an understanding of that, simply opting out of the decision to click all those links that come in those strange emails that you get probably isn't an option that we would see as that we're happy for people to do while they're deciding whether or not to catch up. But more generally, we're large organizations with many functions, so we can generally locate people in things that suit them. So I think it's probably important for us to separate out the must-dos from the which everybody absolutely has to do, from those areas where it's maybe more of an issue on style. The other thing which often we're very much looking for is people who are front of house, whether that's in a benefits office or somewhere else. So we can be adaptive to the different skills that people bring, but that doesn't work for cybersecurity and things like that.
Thanks, Jeff. Danielle, in your experience, are people difficult to persuade to come on board? And I think you've mentioned about kind of spaces you create that help people rather than maybe the cynicism, you actually kind of encourage people in other ways. Is that something that you
Yeah, well, I mean, my thought is you want to lead by example, more or less. Kind of, I mean, everything that's been said, I would echo, just in that, it's not scary, it's not too much. I do think we need to prioritize what's going to actually help the public the most. So like, revitalizing forms or making sure that we're like really prioritizing the processes that need it over, the stuff that we just want because it's exciting. And I'm talking to myself here. But one of the things that we've tried to do, especially when it comes to, digital communications, is we created an internal, almost it's lighter than any kind of structured learning. We have internal training, but we created a community of practice that made it a little bit more, accessible. It's doi.gov/creative comms. We call ourselves Creative Comms. And it's basically, we have internal experts come and talk, because one of the things we realized a few years ago was, the way we train, the way we do stuff, kind of going back to what Stephen said, like we needed quicker, not full length courses, but just one-offs that kind of spark the imagination that then if someone is really passionate about it, they can pursue kind of a more serious training opportunity. But so we've done things on, different areas where I do think we all need to be in sync. I kind of imagine it like we're all rowing a boat, and if some people are rowing in one direction, we're not going in the right way, and we're not going to go anywhere. And so when it comes to technology, when it comes to communication, I want to make sure that we're providing multiple levels of different conversations. Some people learn by the training, some people learn through the conversation after. But really just making it as accessible as possible. It comes down to also seeing like your community of peers learning it too. I can't tell you, at the very beginning of the pandemic, we had a training on Facebook Live, which, it was just one of our park rangers talking about how he uses it at Yellowstone National Park. And it was talking about that. It came at the perfect time. We had a lot of different park rangers attend because they could no longer maybe, engage in the way they were due to the pandemic. And I think it was a good example of exactly what we wanted that community of practice to be, this like approachable, you're using it as a solution. It needs to be a solution for how to do your job better. And I think that I just always go under the assumption people want to do their job well. So how do we give you the tools? How do we, and I think that's true. And I totally agree, though, it may not be for everyone. And so if you don't enjoy it, it's going to change the way people interpret what you're saying. So you need to find someone who does enjoy it. and there's plenty of work to be done. So it's not, but yeah, that's my thought.
And maybe some of that resistance and cynicism in the questions comes from a sense of fear and
going back to that digital, like there is this kind of connotation that's associated with it where it's cold and distant and, you know, not personal and run by robots, and it hasn't gotten better because there are a lot of bots online. So it's like, I should probably do a training on what's a bot, but like how to tell if you're in an argument with a bot right now. But I mean, the thing is, some of the best, like the people who are initially the most averse to it come around when they actually connect with real humans on the other side, or they help someone, so I mean, I think it's a both and I think you've like figuring out what is, going back to like aligning with your culture, what is the way, you know, where are the hangups, and trying to just try things and adjust. Yeah.
Thanks, Danielle. I mean, Stephen, this is everything you do. It's about kind of training people. So have you come across this kind of reluctance, resistance, cynicism, and what are your kind of strategies for getting past that?
Of course we have. And it's hard, right? You know, just learning in general is hard, or at least if you're doing it right, it should be. And we might all like it, but you know, people have to put effort in, and if they can't connect that with their purpose, then yeah, you're off to a bad start. So, and it doesn't matter if it's digital or any kind of learning program. It doesn't have to be government. I mean, we take the same approach, right? We get under the skin of why the organization is trying to build these capabilities, and that's kind of the most important thing. What are those capabilities and why? Because you're going to need that to explain to the people on this program, to kind of market them, to engage with them. And if you can answer that question properly, then that resistance is much, much smaller. And I also agree about the point in terms of the kind of compliance courses or things that you need to show evidence of, and it not being an option, you know. And I think that's in a way a harder sell. But in another way, because you're making it mandatory, you've kind of got a mechanism to deal with it. But if you think of all learning in that way, what is the mechanism we're going to use? How are we going to incentivize, and how are we going to enforce? And what program does that mean that we need to build to truly inspire people and then allow them to kind of grow these competencies?
Great, thank you. I love the fact that the conversation is so much about people and kind of those human issues, which is really good. I said we would probably get a question around data, and we absolutely have. So from Ahmed, there's a question come in the digital era, how can we build and maintain data trust? Is it possible to have both speed and trust without compromise? And this question quite often comes up when we're talking about digital, and I think it's as much about kind of the workforce itself as about building trust between the citizens as well, in kind of the privacy issues and security around their data if you're building digital solutions. So I'm sure you've all got lots of thoughts around how do we build trust in a digital era. Teresa, I'm going to come to you first.
Yeah, so for me, trust is all about being all about transparency. If we are transparent with how we're using people's data, and especially when we're talking citizens, if we're transparent with how we're using their data, what it's being used for, I think people are much more willing to give up, you know, certain parts of their data in order to gain, you know, the services. But I do believe that trust has to come with some transparency for sure.
Yeah, transparency, a big part of that. Jeff, your thoughts on kind of the trust issues, and is this something that comes up for you on a regular basis? Oh, I think Jeff might be glitching again over there. Stephen, I'm going to come back to you.
Yeah, I think this is about people just understanding, you know, the consequences, right? Understanding the landscape and being able to kind of make informed decisions on how to legislate for the safety of data and where that data might end up, right? And so for me, that's kind of a set of skills and competencies that need to be built, and far more widely than just like in a data science team. You know, there's kind of no excuse for people not having a familiarity with these kind of concerns at any level in government these days. So yeah, I believe strongly that building those skills and education is a way in building that trust.
Thanks. Danielle, the issues around trust, that must have been something as you used kind of social media more in terms of creating a different relationship with the public. Was trust an issue?
Yeah, well, so it's always, it's something you want to build. It's very easy to lose it. It's something that you know, depending, it gets complicated with the politics and everything else. So I mean, I would say that it's a process. And actually I read the Edelman Trust Barometer every time it comes out, and I just get dismayed because I know that the trust in the government is pretty low, and you know, for all different reasons. But that being said, the way I build it is I show up every day, and I do my very best to be as transparent and give them the information that I have. I think that, you know, when it comes down to it, digital is a tricky one because we are kind of learning as we go in a lot of ways. And so it really does just come down to communicating what you can and being as careful with information as you can be. And yeah, I think you've got to be transparent. You know, I think back to like my favorite bosses, for example, and like the ones that kept you from worrying, but did fill you in. Yeah. We're the kind of ones that's how I kind of view the government. It's like, we're not going to tell you everything because it just would whatever, but we are going to tell you what you need to know to like continue to be amazing. And that's kind of where I see it. I think we need to like not bog them down with the details, but give them the information that they need. And so, and yeah, I think that's the Edelman Trust Barometer is something that is basically, it's interesting because right now nonprofits are pretty low. And it's businesses that people are trusting. And I find that fascinating, just from a standpoint that, yeah. And part of how I use social media to build that is to show them that it's all sorts of people behind the government. It's not, the government's not this giant thing that's this block in your way. It's individuals who are trying to solve solutions or make problems go away and offer solutions. So, so that's how social media can kind of help. It can show the human behind it.
And I think the audience will certainly relate to what you said at the beginning in terms of civil servants kind of have to transcend the politics. So trust in governments will come and go and in different administrations, but the civil servants just have to keep things going, and they, have to move forward with the
When I managed a nonprofit, community, I tried to get them to love us, but with government, I want peaceful unrest. I want them to be engaged. Yeah. I want them to question. That's not bad. It's more, I want it to be peaceful, and I want them to know how to interact. And I think that's I want them to be engaged and pay attention. But yeah.
Thanks. Jeff, are you back with us now?
Fantastic. I think there's probably two or three things here. So the first is there's a really dull thing, which is if we're going to have trust, we need to know where our information is and how we manage it and how we process it. So our systems and processes need to be really well done and really well documented. And also people across the organization need to understand those issues and have the skills. And that's been an area of focus for us. So that enables us to be transparent, because it's very difficult to be transparent if you don't really know what you're doing. And there's been times when that's been the case for government. The second thing, I guess, is we need to be careful not to conflate different issues here, because there are some people who don't want government to have information at all. It's not that they don't trust how we manage information. They think it's wrong. And they run strong campaigns about the unethical nature of government because it holds information at all. So we need to be able to distinguish that. And I guess the other thing to distinguish is we have state actors and others who would wish to undermine confidence in government by questioning data and data policy. And again, this is part of I guess the post-Cold War environment that we now live in. So we do have a question about trust, but that is being amplified by those voices which deny government its role and which would seek to undermine government's role. And I do think the corrective to that is transparency and really good systems. But we can only fix some of these problems. Others of these problems sit outside us.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely a challenge. I can't believe how quickly the time has gone. We've got time for one more set of questions in a moment. I just want to say to the audience, the survey will have gone out. You'll find it in your inboxes. If you could take a couple of minutes to fill that in, that would be fantastic. We'd be hugely grateful, because it just makes sure we can provide the type of webinars that you're interested in the future. So thank you from me in advance for that. I'm going to pose, in the time we've got left, I'm going to put 2 questions to the panel, and you can choose to answer one or either of these questions. I'm just conscious we're going to run out of time. So one has come in from Pamela, who says, how are you providing security of permanent positions to this workforce that is known to be very mobile? So I think she's picking up on that sense that we recognize people's jobs might be kind of time limited in nature on a particular project, but how do they, if you want to recruit them and retain them, what security are you giving them of permanent positions? So that's one issue, more on the HR side of things. The other one from Terry Bowmaster, picks up on this trust and transparency issue. And he says, sometimes in the case of AI, for example, models aren't always completely open or transparent. So how do we explain our trust in the technology to the wider public when it's not always clear exactly what type of automation or AI system we're using? So you can answer one or both of those questions. Jeff, as you're on the line, and you might glitch, I'm going to come to you first, if that's right, on this one.
Siobhan, I have to say this is the strangest exam I've ever done. It was an HR question and an AI question. I'm really concerned as to what degree this Viva is for.
Good job, Jeff.
I'll take a punt at the first one. So again, that comes back to, we know at the moment that we have significant numbers of engineers working on social security as we work through the process of creating a Scottish system. We won't need that scale of people within that enterprise in maybe 3-4 years' time. At the same time, I'm relatively confident that there will be other work that we will need to fill. And so we're now beginning to look at that through the lens of workforce planning. So I don't think there will be an undersupply of work to be done. And on that basis, very much what my proposal and proposition is, we should be offering full-time permanent contracts unless there's a really good reason not to. And that's the general approach. So I would just go with that. I'm going to skip the AI one because my answer to that would be like about 8 minutes long because of the relationship to automatic processing of data and medical device regulation. But if that's
No
okay.
problem. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks so much. Stephen, I'm going to come to you for your thoughts on kind of permanent work or the AI transparency issue.
I'm going to go for the AI transparency issue question. Not because I'm going to give a more fulsome answer than Jeff would have done, but because actually this sort of touches on another area of what Coursera for Government does. So we build a lot of, or we take part in a lot of workforce development programs. And actually, I think, we've been talking about how, digital transformation has kind of driven a need to upskill civil services and public servants. But actually, I worry, and particularly when I look at the data in the UK, I worry about the digital literacy levels of the public as well. And I think it's vital they understand, or they could even get their heads around what Terry's getting at in the question, to be able to grasp it at that sort of second or third layer down of what these issues are. I think we've got a long way to go before that's sort of in the wider public consciousness. And there is a responsibility for governments essentially to think about how it deals with that.
Thanks a lot, Jeff. Teresa, I'm going to come to you because that kind of picks up on something you started with, really, wasn't it? Which is there are a lot of misconceptions around what digital is, what new technologies are, what automation is. So, and I mean, you mentioned transparency. How would you approach this question around,
Yeah, so when we talk about data models, I think that's something, we're grappling with right now. We have a data strategy that we're putting in place or that we're trying to implement right now. And I think part of our, next step is really that ethical use of AI. How are we going to attack that? How are we going to, work through that? And there are applications out there that can sort of pull apart your AI to the point where it can provide at least some transparency to the end user. So if you're looking at making decisions, right? So how are those decisions made? And I think about being transparent with the public or with whomever, like whether it's, you know, industry or other government agencies or even employees themselves, right? How those decisions were made and being very transparent about how those decisions were made, what your sort of decision tree was, and your, you know, a little bit about the algorithm without giving away, you know, too much, right? Because some of the stuff you want to keep in house. But I think at least those, you know, how those decisions were made is very important. And I think that's something that we haven't quite got it right yet. But I think that's something that I know, at least in my shop, that's something we're going to be looking at over the course of the next year or so, to sort of just figure that out. And when it comes to, you know, security of permanent positions, look, you know, you're, you know, to Stephen's point, you're going to be retrained every few years anyhow. So if you're pulled in for something today, in 3 years, you know, you could be working on something else. And I actually before I went to the public service, I worked in the private sector, and the organization I worked with, it was a multinational, or international company. And it was really big. And it's, you know, one of its sort of caveats was it didn't like to see people in a position for more than 3 years. And if you start, because, you know, your initial is you've got like all this excitement and you're learning, you're ramping up your first year, your second year, you're like, okay, I got this, you know, and by your third year, you're just kind of like, meh, yeah, you know, old hat, calling it in. And so they really encouraged people that by the time they're, you know, cresting on their third year, they really should start looking at something else, because it just keeps you alive. It keeps you and you know, it keeps that energy going. So absolutely, I would recommend invest in people. And then even, you know, across a 30-year career with the federal service, like I've had so many jobs, I've worn so many different hats, you know, from a creative director to a database administrator, I've done a million different things. And I feel like that's kept me interested. And it's also, I think, made a better, more well-rounded individual, right, at the end of the day. So I absolutely, like, invest in your people, and I think that's a great opportunity.
Definitely one of the benefits, isn't it, of working in a civil service, that you have that range of roles that you can move across. Danielle, we started with you. I'm going to finish with you, either on the AI and transparency or the security of job issue.
I would go with the security of job. And I would just say, especially from a digital communication standpoint, like having a communicator that knows the organization is incredibly important. So if you can invest in them, like that is the ideal. In fact, you know, I would say that it's government offers these opportunities where, like in the US, we can detail places, we can try jobs out, we can get, but having that security, really, it's just nice to invest in communicators who know the organization, because I can tell you, when you're on the front line, when you're doing digital, whether you're writing emails or web content, or you need to know the organization really well. And so investing in those, I mean, that's what you kind of want to do. And when I see examples of that, I get very excited, because losing that means losing a lot of institutional knowledge, which
yeah. Fantastic. Thank you so much. I mean, great to end on that of investing in people. I think people has been the thread running throughout this, which is great for a webinar on digital. We are sadly out of time. I think we managed to get through almost every question that came in. So thank you to the wonderful audience for sending in all those questions.